In this video, I want to talk about business presentations and what we can learn from an actual example of a research presentation by Accenture. I personally love business presentations. I think it's one of the key deliverables that most people work on in today's business world, and which is why I think it's always helpful to spend some time reflecting what can we learn from other presentations, best practices, different companies, and that's what I'm trying to do in this video. I'm probably going to do first introduce the presentation a little bit and then focus on a few positives and then a few negatives and wrap up at the end. And if there are any other observations, questions you have, feel free to leave them in the comment section. My name is Felix Haller. I'm a former management consultant at Bain Company, where I spent over 5 years jumping from project to project, helping companies with various problems and questions and creating tons of presentations. And I just love still, after leaving Bain, creating presentations and sharing some best practices, what I've learned, and I hope it helps some people watching this video. Here I'm looking at a presentation by Accenture, one of the big consulting companies, and it's a research study where they looked at the question of how to successfully scale digital innovation to drive growth. How do you use small innovation companies and scale it quickly? And which companies do it best? What are some best practices? And for that purpose, they surveyed a bunch of people and then charted up the results. And let me quickly walk you through how they structured the presentation, and then we can dive into some of the learnings and best practices. So the first slide, they start with the research question, can we find best practices? Then a slide around what they did, the specific survey characteristics, the N, what kind of people, which countries. And then this is the results slide, which shows the key insights, the key messages. And then this is interesting, the way they structure this presentation is into a few sections where they start with the question and then the answer right there, and then a few supporting slides. So here the question is current status in scaling digital innovation, things are speeding up in surprising ways. And then here they provide some supporting evidence, charting up the results from the survey. Let's go quickly here. Then the next section, the same structure, question, answer, and then a few supporting slides. Next question, supporting slides. Question, answer, supporting slides. And then this slide is interesting framework. Some key context to reach out. I mean, this is basically a marketing presentation, so they obviously want to share some context. And then the appendix with some of like the survey demographics here, like about like who filled out the survey, which industry, and then some like caveats here, disclaimers at the end. So this is the structure of the presentation. And now I would love to go just slide by slide and share some of my findings, what I think is good and what we can learn from it, and what I think they could have improved on. So they start off with the question, clearly stating what are we trying to find with the study, like what are you learning out of this? Can we find key best practices that could help companies overcome challenges, scaling like small innovations and making them big, basically. Good starting off with the question, like what are you trying to answer actually? Like what is the purpose of this presentation? Sometimes people make the mistake of just sharing random slides without clearly articulating what are we trying to solve here? Like what's the question? And then what is the specific answer that we came up with or thinking of right now? Like what's the hypothesis? What I don't love about it, especially like this first slide, I even though it's simple, it's a little confusing where the research question is. So it's basically here on the right, the little purple one, which is to the side. It's just like a question a little off. And I think it could have been a little clearer if it was just below here. So like you read from top to bottom, because you have here our premise and research question, then they have two sentences here, and then to the right there's just this box, and it's not really clear that is the research question. I think visually it's interesting, right? It's innovative. It's a little off center, but I think it could have been a little clearer. I also think, even though I like that they used a very interesting color, the purple. with the pattern up here and using so much of the purple at the top in their slide design, I think it distracts a little bit from the message, from some of the things they want to show on the content. So I'm not a huge fan of using a third of the slide on just the header and with like the idea, find industry best practices. That's just me personally. But overall, I think simple slide. And I like that they start off with the question. Really important to always think about like what are we trying to solve for? And then obviously providing an answer. The next slide, this is just to tell people like what the survey demographics are. In the appendix they have a little bit more, but it's always good to be transparent about what the N is. When you present survey results and put them on charts, it always looks very precise and accurate. If you have a bar chart and you say 67% of respondents or 35 think this or that, but if you only interviewed or surveyed 20 people, the 67% that you're stating is a little misleading. Because if you survey 20 different people, it might come down to 25% or whatever. I think the statistical significance is just not there if it's a low end. So I think especially the N is really important, and then you want to have obviously surveying the right people. If you're trying to understand homeowner purchase decisions, you want to survey actually homeowners and not renters. I think this is good. I mean, this is basic stuff. And then here the result. I think this is also an important takeaway from this presentation. What I like, they start with a question and then they provide the answer or the results very early in the presentation, as opposed to at the end. There's always a debate of whether to start with the results or end with the results. I think it's always better to start with them, because that's basically what people are looking for. If you're presenting this to executives or like junior people, in the end you wanna make sure that they take away your key messages, your key results. And if they only have 5 minutes, you're gonna make sure that they take away the key messages and not after going through all the slides, they're like, oh, I have to dip out, and they don't hear your key messages. So starting with the key results and then supporting evidence to dive deeper into the topic, I think is a very good approach. The key findings: 60% of all digital proof of concepts getting scaled. 15% manage their scaling efforts differently, the leading ones, and then there's 4 best practices that they're sharing, a little bit of a framework. Here, I think what I really like about this is they're sharing the key findings, and then they sprinkle in like these 2 here, a surprise, exclamation point, the reason to read, the best practices are what readers will come for, to make it a little bit more exciting as opposed to just a boring text presentation. And they do a good job with the purple, the coloring, and then like the simple charts later. Good takeaway is to using visual things, tools to spice it up a little bit. And so here, like key findings, but then here, surprise, we didn't expect this. There's reasons to read, you're gonna get frameworks, just to making it a little bit more exciting. And then, as I said in the beginning, now we're going into the different sections where they're starting with a question. What's the current status in scaling these digital proof of concepts, innovation? And they're saying things are speeding up in surprising ways, like a little bit of a question or something more interesting to come. And now let's look at some of their slide designs. So the way they structure their slides is at the top they have this really big header, and then they have a smaller header, and then typically in the content area, content section, one big chart. And this is great. I think always focus on simple slides. If you can, having only one key chart on a slide is always the way to go. Sometimes you want to add a little bit more content on the slide, sure, but if you can, try to minimize any additional distractions, any additional wording and content. And so here, and they do a really good job of having one chart. Here, a cluster bar chart where they're comparing the innovation parity between automotive OES and cross-industry. And you see product and service design is way higher for automotive companies. That's what you want to have in the title then. Like, what's the key message? And looking at this slide, design and production and operations are innovation priorities for auto OES companies, which is the key message. So they start with a key message at the top in the biggest font size possible. jumps off the page. This is what you want to take away from, and then there's supporting data to support it. Then they have this subtitle here, the purple one, the little smaller one. I'm personally not a huge fan of it. It's a little unclear when you look at the slide, like what's the relationship between them? Is it also an action title, like a key message, or is it more of descriptive? What are you looking at on the slide? So I would probably opt for just one action title and then like a descriptive short title of what you're looking at on the chart, like innovation priority, percent of respondents that agreed with this statement or something. But I think overall, simple slide, clearly laid out, not too much clutter around it. Some of the sentences I think could have been streamlined a tad, maybe some wordsmithing there, but overall pretty good. The same with this slide, same structure, 2 titles, a big one and a little smaller one, and then one big chart. Really effective, I think. Here, this one is more of a bullet slide, like a message, and then two bullets, 2 activities, 2 recommendations. Number 1, operate at speed, blah, 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 and then continuously deliver reliable products to customers. I think this slide, what I like, it's simple, it's focusing on 2 things. They try to use selective bolding here with the innovative, and then in the second bullet as well. Here, like a visual feature to make them stand out a little bit. I'm not a fan personally of using photos in the background. I think it's very distracting. It makes it harder to read the sentence. I believe that the marketing department thought it was a little more interesting to have something else on this page other than just the bullets. And then all the other slides, like similar structures. We don't need to go through all of them. Always the big bold black one and the purple one. Here they use like a little bit more of an interesting chart, which I think is a little harder to read, but I think you kind of want to mix it up a little bit, not always using the same bar charts throughout the presentation. Here more like a morph box kind of chart. Then what else are they doing? Some pie charts. Yeah, I'm going a little faster now because I don't want to make this video too long. I want to get to this one other one. Here, this is an interesting slide. They use the full slide to share their framework, their key findings. And on the positive side, I think it's really good to think about new ways to show your findings, figuring out a new framework or ways to think about like a mental model, so to speak, of what are all the things, how should we think about this, as opposed to just sharing the data and just showing bar charts, for instance, which they did in the beginning of more like just sharing the findings, like what are people saying? And this is more like the next step where you're trying to be a little bit more prescriptive of, so on the left hand, what they're saying here, for instance, traditional organization at the bottom and then reorganization to reinvent top right, that's where you want to go. And then what are the things you need to do to get there? And that's kind of what consulting at its best is trying to do, is helping people improve, helping companies improve and getting to the next stage. And so they have these waves here, cadets, contenders, and champions. And they're saying champions do these things or are good at it. And then they do some bucketing here, technology, skill sets, ecosystem, leadership culture. I think this is really cool. I love slides like this. The downside is it is a little bit difficult to explain and is quite complicated to, I would say, or it's simple to explain the basics. You want to go from the bottom to the top right. But I think there is a lot on this slide and it tends to overwhelm people. So I would say it's sometimes better to just focus on 3 or 4 key messages as opposed to sharing this complicated framework and showing all the work you've done, basically, all your intellect. Like probably they spend a lot of time crafting this framework. Just something to be aware of, looking at the type of audience you're interacting with, whether this is the right approach or going a little simpler. But in general, I think this is kind of something you want to strive for, is using data, using survey data, experience to come up with a way to think about the industry, a problem, and being more prescriptive and giving guidance of what you would do based on your findings. I think that's a great thing to aim for. Wrapping up, I think this is a overall good presentation. They used survey data to come up with interesting insights that answer specific questions. A few things that I really liked is they started with a question, always coming up with a specific question or research question or business problem that you're trying to solve, and then providing an answer quickly to that specific question and finding supporting evidence. Either you figure it out your own by creating your own data through a survey the way they did it, or you find data within your research department, marketing, internal data, external market research data to prove your point or to find ways to confirm your hypothesis or disprove your hypothesis. But you want to have a clear question, provide a clear answer, and then have supporting evidence. And I think they do a good job at it. Overall, slide design, I think pretty neat, pretty good overall. Sometimes I thought the purple was a little excessive, but I think in a marketing presentation you might want to go a little bit more crazy at times. So thanks a lot. Let me know if there are any questions. Have a good day.